What you know, alibiers, welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. Good to have you here. It's Wednesday, December 10th. I wanted to go over a couple of filings in Kouri Richins' case. To the best of my knowledge, these motions have not been ruled on, so let's jump in. The first is the state's second notice of intent to offer 404B evidence. This was filed November 26th, and the evidence they want to present at her trial: the defendant's financial crimes. The probable cause statement in State v. Richins discloses several crimes, wrongs, and other acts. Next up, Circle R documents. In 2022, Carmen Lauber was a participant in the Wasatch County Drug Court. In April 2022, the defendant drafted 2 letters verifying as purported manager of the Circle R ranch that Carmen Lauber performed community service at the ranch. Eric Richins' father owns a Utah corporation named Circle R Livestock Incorporated and operates the ranch, but the defendant was not involved with the Circle R ranch whatsoever. Carmen Lauber never performed community service at the ranch. Next on the list is the Guild email. I've asked a few people, but we cannot figure out what this is. It's very possible we haven't heard this yet, so we'll see when it goes to trial. Next up is a big one. College savings accounts. The defendant emptied her children's college savings and 529 accounts to fund her business and to forestall complete financial collapse. Holy moly. They cite a case Wright versus Kouri Richins. The defendant, through K. Richins Realty, LLC, sold a home to, I'm not going to say their names, in 2020. They sued the defendant in 4th District Court, State of Utah, in November of 2022 for material misrepresentations and omissions made in her disclosures about the home's condition. Next is C&E distributions intended for quarterly tax deposits. From time to time, C&E Masonry, LLC, made distributions to Eric Richins representing estimated quarterly taxes due. The defendant took these payments and did not remit the tax. Instead, she spent the money. She then misrepresented to their accountant that the payments had been made. The next is Raymond James and BB&T proof of funds. The defendant provided proof of funds documents to lender Sierra West, reportedly from Raymond James and BB&T, indicating large account balances. The defendant did not have accounts with Raymond James or BB&T. The documents supported her application for financing her purchase of the Midway Mansion. Next is shell companies. In obtaining various accounts receivable loans, the defendant listed non-operating shell companies as having receivables. Tell you what, the biggest one on that's emptying her kids' college funds. That's bad. The next motion is the state's motion to exclude evidence that the victim abused drugs in high school. They have requested a hearing for this. The state of Utah requests the court exclude any evidence that Eric Richins abused drugs in high school. This evidence is not admissible because it's not relevant, and any probative value is substantially outweighed by unfair prejudice. Moreover, it is improper character evidence and likely hearsay. Statement of relevant facts. Eric Richins graduated high school in 2000. Eric and the defendant met in approximately 2010. In July 2022, the defendant told Eric Richins' father, Gene Richins, that Eric abused his mother's prescription drugs in high school. Gene denies that Eric abused his mother's prescription drugs in high school, and they get to the argument. Any evidence that Eric Richins abused drugs in high school is not relevant. When the relevance of evidence depends on whether a fact exists, proof must be introduced sufficient to support a finding that the fact does exist. Evidence is relevant if A, it has any tendency to make a fact more or less probable than it would be without the evidence, and B, the fact is of consequence in determining the action. And they cite Utah Rules of Evidence 401. Irrelevant evidence is not admissible, and that's Utah Rules of Evidence 402. The evidence that Eric Richins abused drugs in high school is unreliable because the defendant's testimony is seemingly the only source of the evidence, and her testimony is contradicted by Gene Richins' testimony. Regardless, any evidence that Eric Richins abused drugs as a teenager over 2 decades before his death does not make any fact in this case more or less probable. It is too temporally remote and not part of a continuing course of conduct. Even more so when evidence shows he did not use drugs in the intervening 2 decades. As the defendant explains, when Eric had knee surgery in 2016, he refused to take painkillers when he struggled so bad and hurt so much. He said he was so terrified of getting hooked on that crap again because it made him so high he would only take ibuprofen. Accordingly, any evidence Eric abused drugs in high school is inadmissible under Rule 402. The next section. Any probative value to any evidence that Eric abused drugs in high school is substantially outweighed by the danger of unfair prejudice. The court may exclude relevant evidence if its probative value is substantially outweighed by a danger of one or more of the following: unfair prejudice, confusing the issues, misleading the jury, undue delay, wasting time, or needlessly presenting cumulative evidence. The next section. Any evidence that Eric Richins abused drugs in high school is improper character evidence. Evidence of a crime, wrong, or other act is not admissible to prove a person's character in order to show that on a particular occasion, the person acted in conformity with the character. They cite Utah Rules of Evidence 404B1. This evidence may be admissible for another purpose, such as proving motive, opportunity, intent, preparation, plan, knowledge, identity, absence of mistake, or lack of accident. The only reason to offer evidence that Eric abused drugs in high school is to argue that he abused drugs at the time of his death. This is precisely the use that Rule 404 prohibits, and none of its exceptions apply. Accordingly, any evidence that Eric abused drugs in high school is inadmissible under Rule 404. The next section, any evidence Eric abused drugs in high school is likely hearsay. The defendant appears to be the only source of evidence that Eric abused drugs in high school, and the defendant did not know him in high school or the 10 years after his high school graduation. The defendant could not possibly have personal knowledge about Eric Richins when he was in high school. Accordingly, the defendant's testimony and any other similar situated person's testimony that Eric Richins used drugs in high school is inadmissible under Rule 801C. Conclusion: the court should exclude any evidence that Eric abused drugs in high school because it's not relevant. Any probative value is substantially outweighed by unfair prejudice. It is improper character evidence, and it is likely hearsay. That was filed November 26th. So that's it for this episode. I do have a few more that are a little more lengthy, but kind of tired tonight. So I'm going to call it a day after I get this out. And when I have time in the evenings, I will put out some more of these just so we can get caught up. Hope you guys have a good rest of your evening, and we will see you soon.